please copy this link, and after completing today's session, you can give your feedback for yesterday and tomorrow training. So please copy this feedback link, which is www.wjx.cn/VM. So you can see that. So you please copy this feedback link, right? And the second good news is I asked with my Chinese colleague, and they told me that they have a Mindray comparison with SNIBE in immunoassays. So I asked for this, and then they said they will communicate to the Chinese colleague in Russia. So they will share with you the comparison or representation. So if you not receive such information or a comparison between the SNIBE, McGloomy, and the Mindray immunoassay analyzers presentation, so please let me know. You have my numbers, so you can send me a message. So can I give again a reminder to the global support and training team, so they will reach out to you and provide you the presentation. So it's okay. Okay, Rina. So let's start. So today we have a presentation on autoimmune. So in this presentation, we have a 4 parts. The first part contains about the autoimmune disease. As you know that this autoimmune disease is, let me check. So as you know that this autoimmune disease is a disease in which the immune system produce antibodies against internal cells or organs, and that's called autoimmune disease. And this destroy the natural cells or it's also damage the tissues and the organs as well. So that's why this is due to the malfunctioning of the immune systems triggered due to the self antibodies production. This is called autoimmune disease. The second part we will contains about the autoantibodies and then clinical applications. What are the different diseases and what are the tests that's required to do that? And the third part will contains about the McGloomy autoimmune parameters. So what are the solutions which are provided by the SNI platform for the autoimmune parameters? As of today, we have 235 analytes available on the McGloomy systems. Before that, it was reported around 211 analytes were reported. Assays are available on McGloomy system, but as of today, we are offering 235. And the innovative parameters that I have seen in my message about that, we have also introduced the H. pylori antigen and the other few autoimmune disease and the congenital diseases, also the new parameters we have introduced. And we are growing in the numbers of analytes. We are still ahead with other competitors like Roche, Abbott, Siemens, and J&J, Johnson and Johnson's. So in the last part, we will discuss about the global prevalence of the autoimmune diseases and the CAGR and the global market share and the potential of the markets for this autoimmune assays utilization. So let's start with the first slides about the autoimmune disease. So in this part, first of all, we have to discuss about what is autoimmune disease. It's a condition arises due to the abnormal immune response to a normal body parts. So the body produce antibodies against the normal cells, tissues, and organs against antigens. So that's the condition is called autoimmune disease. So you can see that the global prevalence in different countries and age standardized mortality rate. by the year 2020, 2014. And then the disease which are very common in the autoimmune disease panel is the systematic lupus, systematic sclerosis, idiopathic inflammatory myopathies, S. Sjogren's syndrome, mixed connective tissue disease, and ANCA-associated vasculitis. So these are the few examples of autoimmune diseases. You can see the global distribution on the basis of the more prevalence and the more mortality. The darkened colors in about this green shows you, like if we talk about this green area map, global map, shows the global distribution of the systematic distribution of the systematic lupus. And you can see that those have a high age standardized mortality high rate is darker in color. You can see the countries which are close to the North America and South America, and even in the region of Southeast Asian region, they have a more prevalence as compared to the other countries who have a comparatively low prevalence of the systematic lupus. If we talk about the P portion, this area, you can see that this is for the systematic sclerosis autoimmune disease distribution epidemiologically. That's, you can see the North America, USA and UK are the most impacted country through this systematic sclerosis, and even the Australian region is also more impacted with this systematic sclerosis. If we talk about this C part, that C part indicate that the idiopathic inflammatory myopathies, which includes the American region, South America and North America region, along with some African countries, are also have a more prevalence comparatively as compared to the other countries related to the idiopathic inflammatory myopathies. If we talk about the D part, you can see this D part, the global distribution is more in the this region of Middle East region and then African region. You can see here. So this is for the S. Sjogren's syndromes, and this example is for the mixed connective tissues disease, and this, for example, for the last F1 is associated with the ANCA vasculitis. So this is the global distribution and the prevalence of different autoimmune diseases in the world. So let's discuss about one by one for this. So what is the pathophysiology for this disease? As you know, that the physiology is a normal procedure, and the patho means there's some disease-related physiology occurs. And you know that the immune systems is a natural defense systems which produce antibodies against any foreign particle, antigen or antibodies, which enters into the body, and the immune system triggers WBCs, and then the WCBCs start their defense mechanism. Along with that, the T cells and beta cells are triggered, and they produce, the immune system produces the immunoglobulins, which are that's the globulin protein, which are globulin in nature, and then these are produced by the immune system. That's why I call them immunoglobulins. So the immunoglobulins or antibodies has two major parts. The first part is called the FC region. The second part is called FAB region. So the FAB region has the light chain and the variable region. This is called a variable region. And FC region has an amino acids chain of heavy molecular weight chain. So this is the whole structure. And this part, this variable part, is different for different disease or a different antigen, and the antibodies is different. So if we talk about the antigen and antibodies, you have been observed that in an immune response, any antigen when enters into the body, the immune system triggers and produces that antibodies, and these antibodies have three characteristics. So the major characteristic is that they are highly specific, means this antibodies is highly specific for the antigen, because the variable region is highly specific for antigen 1. It cannot be bind with the antigen 2 or 3. So you can see also here the antigen 2 has also a highly specific region that can only bind with the antigen 2, not with the antigen 1 or antigen 3. So again, the antigen 3, which is also has a variable region, is highly specific for the antigen 3. So this is all the pathophysiology about the autoimmune disease. And if we talk about the special T cells and beta cells secreted, these are autoantibodies which are capable for reactive with the self antigen, as well as these self-reactive cells are killed or being placed into the state of the energy. If it's not occurs, then the self-reactive response may result in the autoimmune disease. So this is a typical example of autoimmune disease, in which when the special T cells and beta cells secrete the antibodies which are capable of being reactive with the self antigen. If the self-reactive cells are killed or being placed into a state of energy, if it's not done, then the self response may result in autoimmune disease. So if we talk about the autoimmune disease, there are a few examples of autoimmune disease. At least 80 types of autoimmune disease are existing as of today. If we talk about some auto disease, like for the thyroid the autoimmune disease, this is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. That's an inflammation of the thyroid gland, and they have a typical syndrome condition in which multiple disease occurs, and the symptoms are there in this Hashimoto thyroiditis. And the second part is related to the cardiac. That's called a systematic lupus erythematosus, and the rheumatoid arthritis, which is the inflammation of the joint, and the eczema and psoriasis, then the celiac disease, and the asthma, and the multiple sclerosis. So these are a neuro related disease, neuropathy related disease. So they really all only nearly any body part can be involved with the autoimmune disease, and it can be characterized into two types. The first type is that called a systematic autoimmune and disease, and the other part is the organ-specific autoimmune disease. So we can characterize autoimmune disease on the basis of their localized and generalized systems, immune system condition, that called systematic and organ-specific autoimmune disease. If you have any question, you can ask me. So it will be great for me. So let's start with the SLE. So SLE stand for systematic autoimmune disease, which is a systematic lupus erythematosus. So systematic lupus erythematosus is an autoimmune disease in which the organs, tissue, or cells are damaged by the additions of the various autoantibodies and immune complexes. Right? So the typical clinical manifestations are the painful and swallow joints, fever, chest pain, hair loss, mouth ulceration, swollen lymph nodes, especially this region, this swollen lymph nodes are observed, feeling tired, and this is one of the typical clinical feature of systematic lupus erythematosus patient is a red rashes, especially on the face. The major prevalence was about 90% of the cases correspondence to the woman of the reproductive age, but there is an predisposition in both sexes and all the ages in the ethnic group. The prevalence of this Systematic lupus erythematosus is more in the United States and UK. It's 15 to 50%. Variation is between 100,000 inhabitants, and it's more in the people of the African descent as compared to the United States and the UK people. So if we talk about the risk factor which may lead to this autoimmune disease are the ultraviolet radiation in the environment factors, may links to the lupus erythematosus and causes the exacerbation in 70% of the patient. This genetic factor is important but not sufficient in
Recording in progress.
Disease, and the coincidence rate in the monozygotic twin is approximately 25% and 2% in zygotic twins. So the probability of systematic lupus erythematosus is more in the monozygotic twins as compared to the dizygotic twins. So if we talk about the global distribution of autoimmune disease, especially the SLE, you can see here it's a more in the Southeast Asian countries like China, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then this region has an more prevalence like Thailand, Malaysia. These are the countries which are more prone because due to there is a low income Asian Pacific, and it's more in also in the Middle East countries where have also genetic issues, and the sun exposure is more, and ultraviolet radiation exposure due to the high exposure of the ultraviolet radiations. So it is less in the you can say that in the area where have a North American and the Latin American, they have 262,000 cases. In the Latin Americans, they have 332 cases. The Europe is also have impacted with this, and then we can say that the Middle East and Africa are also have a high rate of SLE disease in according to the 2017 data of the Decision Research Group. So if we want to see more about the other autoimmune disease, the another example for the usually the joint inflammation and or a synovial tissue degenerative tissue inflammation may lead to this disease of rheumatoid arthritis. That's inflammation of the joints is the common name. So if we talk about the clinical manifestation or the clinical findings, this disease is characterized by the polyarticulate joint, especially in the hands, legs, and in swelling. Especially in the morning, there is some stiffness, and the fatigues is observed in this patients of having a rheumatoid arthritis. Then if we talk about the prevalence, the rheumatoid arthritis is the most common autoimmune disease, which has an estimation prevalence of the 1% of the adult population in the annual prevalence of 0.03%. So if we talk about the risk factors, women are 3 times more likely to develop this disease than men. And then the onset of the disease with 80% of the patient age is between 30 to 50 years of age. So the major cause of RA is the genetic factors, and the human leukocytes antigen is one of the genetic risk factors. And the multidimensional hypothesis for the rheumatoid arthritis is that genetic, congenitive, and psychosocial factors interact with each other in that disease. So this is about the rheumatoid arthritis. So let's talk about more about the prevalence of this disease. According to the 2017 data for both sexes, age standardized incidence race per 100,000 population, you can see that the the prevalence of more in the country, which shows in the red and orange colors, is close to the European countries, and then in the North America, and then the region having a place have a more prevalence as compared to the others. And like the Asian countries have a normal prevalence of 7.5 to 10%, or 10% to the 12.5%, which is comparatively low as compared to the Latin America and then the European countries. So if you go for some other systematic autoimmune disease, that's called an SSC. What is SC or SC? That's called scleroderma or systematic scleroderma. So it's basically a rare connective tissue disease, which has also classified as an autoimmune disorders, and the pathogenesis of this disease is not fully still understood. You can see that this is the condition of connective tissue, and this type of scleroderma can be distinguished as an localized scleroderma or a systematic scleroderma, which can be present in the two forms, limited and the diffuse. If it's localized, we call them a localized scleroderma, or if it's in different organs of the bodies included for this dermatitis, is called as well. So what are the clinical manifestation? That the presence of this skin lesion, which is for almost all the patient, it's observed. Even have the disease itself comes from the typical loss of the elasticity of the skin is also a damage, and also can be a strong feeling of tension, which over the time deploy the thickening and induration. So the risk factor, then prevalence is most likely an autoimmune disease is far more common in women as compared to the men. So more women are more susceptible to as compared to the men. The SSC, that's an systematic scleroderma worldwide among is 6%, 6 in 100,000%, and in women is 28 per 100,000. So you can see that the prevalence of SSC, that's in a systematic scleroderma, is more in women as compared to the men. So the risk factor on the basis of etiology of this systematic scleroderma has not been fully understood yet. It's also generally believed that the genetic environmental factors are the main contributor to this development. So again, this is called autoimmune disease, and the genetic factors are the environmental factors are involved for this. So if we talk about more for prevalence of systematic sclerosis, we may have a different conclusion about the lower occurrence of systematic sclerosis in Asia. It's in North America, high estimated were seen in the majority of studies, considered that the methodological variation among them, which indicates the occurrence of SSC there, may be the highest worldwide. So this clear data from Africa did not allow us to provide the estimate of incidence prevalence for this, and this is the whole country-wise African ethnicity and the overall Europe and the North Americans data has showed that the prevalence of systematic sclerosis is more in North America as compared to the other countries. So this is all about the prevalence of the systematic sclerosis. So if we talk about the systematic autoimmune disease, including the PM and DM, what is PM and DM stand for? So the PM stand for the polymyositis, and the DM stand for dermatomyositis. So basically, it's an inflammation of inflammatory myopathies in this group of disease, which is characterized by the striated muscles and the inflammatory natures, and then histopathological features, which also classify into the idiopathic inflammatory myopathy and sporadic inclusion body myositis are the disease condition in this PM and DM. So the clinical findings they have the weakness of the muscles of the scapulars and the pelvis region. And then they have a neck flexors and the skin lesions. So usually on hands are visible more, but otherwise the scapular and the pelvis regions muscles becomes systematic weak, and they have a more systemic lesion. So if the epidemiological studies carried out in different part of the world, it has been mean that 2.1% to 7.17 new cases are reported every millions inhabitant per years. This is the prevalence of this systematic autoimmune disease of the polymyositis and the dermatomyositis. So risk factors, again, therefore, the exposure of sunlight, which has a more ultraviolet radiation and a greater frequency of dermatomyositis, and the countries farther away, they are the most frequent clinical entity. So this is the reasons why this is common, or the risk factor which may leads to this systematic autoimmune disease of inflammation of the skins and then the tissues. So let's talk about the prevalence of some myositis autoantibodies. So you can see here the UV levels. So it has been observed the country which has high level of UV exposures, like if you go to the India or the Middle East countries, they have more prevalence, and the countries like they have a UV radiation exposure is more like in the countries like United States, which have a prevalence of different in different countries. Argentina, Chile, these are the countries, and tropical of the Australia region. They have a minus 23.5 degrees centigrade area as well. And then they have Japan, Korea, and China. So the anti-MI2 global prevalence in all these subgroups, or they have a countries according to the geographical location, they have obtained the anti-MI2 prevalence. This map shows that this is an MI2 prevalence increase in the geographical zone, which is closer to the equators, and decrease in the location farther to the equators. So this is basically likewise that the UV radiation increases according to the equator proximity, and it's different between the geographical location and UV annual average radiation is high in these countries. So this is overall prevalence of myositis autoantibodies. So on the basis of which we can see that those countries who have an high UV exposure have a more probability. So the next systematic autoimmune disease is Sjogren's syndrome, SS. So what is Sjogren's syndrome? It's basically a chronic autoimmune disease which is characterized by the inflammatory infiltrate at the level of the exocrine gland. So the clinical findings is the involvement of the exocrine gland, especially xerophilocytemia, xerostomia, swelling of the major salivary glands, involvement of other glands as well. So the exocrine extraglandular manifestation, musculoskeletal, neurological, cutaneous means skin, renal, kidney, and gastrointestinal manifestation, because all these the organs, the structures involve the exocrine gland systems, and they due to this Sjogren's syndromes, that's a chronic autoimmune disease which is inflate at the level of the exocrine glands. So this is about the clinical findings. If we talk about the frequency of this Sjogren's syndrome is range between the 0.5 to 3%, and it's more predominant in the female with a ratio of 9 women in front of 1 woman. The most common onset of the young is around age 30, and in the postmenopausal women. So the postmenopausal women are more prone to the Sjogren's syndromes, which is a part of the systematic autoimmune disease. If we talk about the risk factors, alters immune recognitions and the responses, they have a genetical factors including the viral factors, the ultraviolet rays, and then the carcinogenic preservatives that using in the food can lead to this systematic autoimmune disease of SS. That's an Sjogren syndrome. So if we talk about the prevalence of Sjogren's, you can see that the Colombia and the other Latin Americans, there's an earlier age and onsets. They have a lower percentage of positive salivary flow, higher percentage of xerostomy, urticaria, and dysphagia, and the positive ANA and RF. So the prevalence of such autoimmune disease as compared to Sjogren is much a little bit higher in the Latin American region. And if you talk about the higher percentage of Sjogren in female is more observed in American countries as compared to the other countries, and they have a hypergamoglobulinemia condition, and they have high percentage of photosensibility. That's also a big sign of having an autoimmune disease. And then if you go for Europe and African countries, you can see that the higher percentage of females have a more prevalence of Sjogren's as well. And if you talk about the Asian countries like Turkey, China, and Japan, they have a later age of onsets. And then the percentage of the pulmonary involvement, hepatic compromise, renal tubular acidosis, and the positive ANAs, they have also neuropathy and the history of the even more smoking may leads to this as Sjogren's for the autoimmune disease. So if we go for the another systematic autoimmune disease, which is called MCTD. What is MCTD? Basically, it's a mixed connective tissue disease. It's basically another phrase sometime using meaning as an overlap combination of connecting tissue disease. So this is a very complex disease. It's considered to be a three specific disease, which include the lupus, scleroderma, and polymyositis. Patients with these conditions have a feature of each of these three diseases. So the mixed connective tissue disease, MCTD, is a rare condition. Its incidence is about 2% per 100,000. But the clinical manifestation of these MCTD disease is here. If you can see there, the symptoms was vary greatly from one individual to another individual may vary, and they some include some joint pain, joint swelling, skin rashes, and the kidney disease, the breathing problem, heartburn, the swelling problem, mouth ulceration, then skin tightening and thickening, muscles weakness, Raynaud's phenomena like color change in the hands and feet on exposure to the cold. So these are the typical examples or the clinical finding of the mixed connective tissue disease with other clinical testings. So if we talk about the most common significant risk factor for developing these conditions are the gene pattern, and then they are inherited from. So this is a genetic based autoimmune disease, and through this process they have an different clinical findings and then issues. So if we talk about the estimated death or mortality per million inhabitants, you can see that according to 2014 data for the MCTD was a 0.53 ASMR value for this, and then you can see that then in the Latin American side, it's in a more common area which has a more MCTD related deaths. So the next is an systematic autoimmune disease of PBC. What stands for the PBC? The PBC is basically a primary bilateral cholangitis. Cholangitis, basically, that's called a primary biliary cirrhosis. It's a chronic disease in which the bile duct in your livers are slowly destroyed. So this is the normal phase, and this is a jaundice-like phase. It's an PBC is relatively a rare disease. It's affected up to the 1 in 3,000 to 4,000 people. The main manifestation is common symptoms are the fatigue, the pruritus, itchiness, and the jaundice. And these are the three major symptoms along with the other clinical findings. and the serological testing. The risk factor is basically women are more prone to this disease. It's most likely be occurs at the age between 30 to the 60 years, and more likely to be get the condition in which the family members who has or had it. And most common is a genetically disorder, and it's most common in the European descent, and the primary bilateral cholangitis affect all races. So this is all about the information. So the prevalence and incidence of PBC is according to the 2001 to 2016 data. It's more in the European countries and the North American region, including the Greece, Sweden, Ireland, and then Italy and USA are the most effective countries. If we talk about the Asian Pacific, it's an also increasing trend of the prevalence of PVC over the time. The most common is in Japan, and then after the Japan, the New Zealand and Australia. These are the countries which have more prevalence of PBC in more. So it is believed a rare disease in the Asia Pacific region, but the prevalence and incidence seems to be lower in the Asian Pacific region as compared to the European countries and the North American countries. So you can see that in this the other area is in Asia Pacific, is the New Zealand, South Korea, and Hong Kong are more common with this PVC disease. So if we talk about who gets the autoimmune disease, so the autoimmune disease can be can affect anyone. This is important. So certain peoples are at greater risk, like women of childbearing age, people with a family history or genetic history for any autoimmune disease, people are around certain thing in the environment like uh, sun exposure, chemicals, solvent, viral and bacterial infections are linked to the many autoimmune disease. So people who are a certain race and the ethnic backgrounds may have a prone to the type 1 diabetes, which is more common in the white people, and the lupus is more severe for the African American and then Hispanic people. So these are the gene factors or the races or ethnicity based distribution of different disease, including the autoimmune disease of type 1 diabetes, and then the environmental factors, the genetic history, and the sex differentiation, like the woman having a childbearing age is more prone to autoimmune disease as compared to the other disease. So if we talk about the autoantibodies and clinical application, there are two very common names are used, that's called ANA and ENA. So they have a profile in the name, and then autoantibodies profiling. So ANA screening tests include these parameters, which are these anti-M23 EMA, anti-RIPSP, anti-double stranded DNA, anti-HS-STOM, H-storm, anti-centromeres. The ENA profile or ENA screening test contain anti-SS-ARO, anti-SM, anti-SCL70, or anti-JO1. And then anti-SSBL, anti-NRSML. These are the also the part of ENA profiles. And then you can see that they are used in the ANA and ENA autoantibodies profiling systems. So overall, this is an cell structures. You hopefully you are very much familiar with them. The central part is the nucleus, and the nucleus contains the nucleolus, nucleoplasm, nuclear envelope, and the nuclear pores, and the other the cell organelles are the centrosomes, centrioles, lysosomes, ribosomes, which each organelle has their different responsibilities, the Golgi bodies and cytoplasm and mitochondria and the secretory vessels. All these have in their different utilization for providing energy to the cells, and then organ, then tissues, then organs. So if we talk about more, a little bit about the British Journal of Journal Practice for the ANA and ENA screening. So you can see here in an ANA profile, if it's in a negative, undetected. So the strong clinical suspicions of the rheumatoid autoimmune condition, such as a high pre-test probability. So no re-evaluation clinically or other than appropriate investigation, then go for a yes for the further. And this is basically a flow chart for the suggestion of the clinical utilization of ANA and extracellular nuclear antigen, anti-nuclear antibodies and extracellular antibodies of ENA and ANA profiling. So if the ANA is positive, then it's go for a low titer, then it's go for the clinical rheumatoid autoimmune conditions. Otherwise, if it's the high titers, then you have to go for the ENA, anti-double stranded DNA. If it's a positive or negative and ENA is positive, then not include in the standard ENA panel. For example, antihistone and PCNA is in rheumatoid hematology where needed. So if you use the guideline for the ANA and the specific autoantibodies testing, you have to follow these guidelines. Ask for the ANA testing. If yes, then there are two probability for ANA testing. If you have done a ANA testing, if it's positive, then you have to go for the SLE investigation on the basis of evaluation of the history, clinical finding, and degree of ANA positivity. If no SLE CDD, then you have to go the primary say Sjogren's syndromes or SSE, scleroderma or myositis, which further investigate on the basis of SSA and SSP testing, which are highly specific in compared to the ANA pattern. If the centromere, nucleolar, and other tests are having some findings, then they can go individually about the SSC and then specific ENA and the negative profile. Then if the ANA testing is negative, then you have to reevaluate the clinical findings because your direction for the diagnosis is not in the right direction because they have a negative feedback. If SLE is likely, then repeat ANA. If again the repeat ANA is negative, and then go for a SSA testing. Then if the SSA test is positive, then ANA negative SLE variation likely you have to correlate with the clinical finding. Or if you have a SLE unlikely, then follow up, then repeat ANA if indicate clinically, and then go to the negative. So this is basically an algorithm approach for the ANA testing, along with the suggestion of the clinical utilization of ANA and ENA testing for the rule out of the autoimmune disease of different cases. So if we talk about the systematic lupus erythematosus, this is the immunofluorescence case, and in which we can rule out the suspected SLE patient. This is an algorithm according to the guidelines of the BMJ journal, Annals of the Rheumatic Disease, updated on the diagnosis and management of the systematic lupus and erythematosus. So SLE, you have to go for an ANA positive test or ANA negative. With ANA negative test, hypocomplementemia and or positive APL alternate entry criteria is required, and then with at least one clinical criterion greater than score is greater than 10 in case of ULAR or ACR score, then the clinically SLE. The diagnosis of this SLE is supported by the laboratory abnormalities, including the serological testing and the classification criteria for ULAR ACR 2019 have the best combination of sensitivity and specificity, but required positive ANA as an entry criterion. So if the ANA is positive, so you have to go for a EULAR, the ACR score, which is, if it is less than 10, then immunological score is 0, then the clinical score is greater than 8, ACR 97, photosensitivity, or the immunological score is greater than 2, clinical score is greater than 6, then it leads to the clinical SLE. So ENA is positive, EQLR and ACR score is greater than 10 with at least one clinical criterion, you can be classified as an SLE. So the classified SLE and the clinical SLE's differentiation can be done using the ULR ACR scoreboard along with the ENA testing. So this is about the diagnostic approach for the patient with having suspected SLE. And it can be used for the classification criteria to aid the clinical diagnosis. So if we move the next slide. The rheumatoid arthritis. Basically, in the rheumatoid arthritis with the suspected persistent synovitis, this rheumatoid arthritis is expected. It's the marker for the serological marker for this test is NTCCP. This is an highly specific marker for the rheumatoid arthritis as compared to the RF test, antibodies testing, or RA test, which is used in the lab for the fringing. The small joint of the hands or feet are affected. More than one joint is affected, and there may be a delay of 3 months or longer between the onset of the symptoms and the medical advice. So it is also recommended to for a suspected persistent synovitis or the rheumatoid arthritis is referred to specialist care as small joints or hand is feet affected, more than one joint affected, or you have to consider measuring the NTCCP along with the rheumatoid factor, blood test with the rheumatoid factors, and the X-ray of the hands and the feet. If the RA diagnosis is no, then consider alternate diagnosis. If the RA test of these 1, 2, and 3 investigations support the diagnosis for the rheumatoid arthritis, as soon as possible, you have to inform the diagnosis like major anti-HCV antibodies, X-ray the hands and the feet, and this can lead to the recommendation and the management and monitoring of rheumatoid arthritis. So what is anti-CCP? Cyclic citrullinated pyrophosphate antibodies severe is a better diagnostic market. This is basically anti-cyclic citrullinated peptide antibodies when the RF is negative. Usually, the RF test has an immunoturbidimetric titration methodology, usually in on a chemistry analyzers or immunoassay analyzers as an chemoluminescence immunoassay technique. But for the chemistry analyzers, they have usually the immunoturbidimetric titrations. So due to some cross reactivity and some interferences and some other reasons, the RF may be negative. But if you want to use a specific marker for the rheumatoid arthritis, it's better to use an anti-CCP for the diagnosis, not only for the diagnosis and also for the prognosis as compared to the conventional RF test alone. So the anti-CCP in a clinical practice is enhanced the ability of rheumatology to make judicious treatment decisions, and then the anti-CCP positive cases with the RF are 40 and RF negative were 23, and the anti-CCP negative patients were false positive on RF13 as compared to the 7 negative. This is also an correlation or a cross tabulation of anti-CCP and RF in the rheumatoid arthritis patient. If we more talk about So if we more talk about the comparison of the clinical features in the patient of RA related in NTCCP and the RF, you can see that if a gender female has an 66 patient has been tested, they have a 51 NTCCP positive, have an 48 RF positive. The male they have tested in 17, they have a 12 male were NTCCP positive, 5 were RF positive. The disease duration is less than 5 years. They have a 58 numbers anti-CCV positive with the 48 RF positive. And then if the disease condition is greater than 5 years, the 5 anti-CCP were positive and the 5 RF positive was positive. So you can see that if the age of disease like rheumatoid arthritis is less than 5 years, so the anti-CCP marker is more specific as compared to the RF markers. So in erosive diseases, it has been reported that the 87 anti-CCP were positive, and then the RF positive is also less as in erosive disease. In case of anemia, the anti-CCV positive is 95 as compared to the positive sample of 94.34, which is equally good that the anemic condition in the anemic condition, both anti-CCP and the RF positive results shown as an indicator of the anemia. If we talk about the joint erosions and the seropositivity, that the seropositivity for the anti-CCP positive, and that's a total 63 cases, in which the joint erosion seen in number of cases is 55. If you talk about the RF, they have a 53 total positive cases and then 28 joint erosion seen in number of cases. If you talk about both RF and anti-CCP, the 40 all 41 joint erosion seen in number of the cases. So this is all about the anti-CCP and RF tests utilization in conjunction with each other and the clinical finding of the patient to rule out the rheumatoid arthritis. So let's talk about the systematic scleroderma. Basically, according to the American College of Rheumatology, 20,000 ACR and EULAR criteria for the classification of systematic sclerosis. So this is the form which belongs to rule out the or classify the systematic sclerosis. That is thickening of the finger of the both hand, score 9. They have a skin thickening of the fingers, fingertip lesion, telangiectasia, abnormal nail fold capacity, pulmonary arterial hypertension, Raynaud pneumonia, SSC-related autoantibodies, anti-centromeres and anti-spiromeres, anti-SCL70, score is required along with the anti-RNA polymerase. So these are the serological and autoimmune bodies antibodies testing is done. So the diagnosis of this is systematic scleroderma can be made in the patient with a total score of greater than 9. So if the total score is greater than 9, and then it's may lead to the diagnosis for the systematic scleroderma. Any question? So if we talk about the polymyositis and the dermomyositis, as you know that according to the EULAR and ACR classification criteria for adult and juvenile IAM, which is no better explanation for the symptoms existing the criteria is that. So the anti-JOI autoantibodies presence is also have an inflammatory idiopathic myopathy, which can be divided into 5 groups. It's based on the primary idiopathic polymyositis, primary idiopathic dermatomyositis. DM and PM are associated with the neoplasia, childhood DM, which is a dermatomyositis, and the PM associated with the vasculitis, and then with associated with the collagen vascular disease. So if we talk more about the assays, which is an S-Jordan syndromes, and then there is also a criteria for S-Jordan syndromes, and on the basis of the rating systems, then autoantibodies detection like NT-RO and SSA, which is a specific marker for this S-Jordan syndromes. If it's positive, it's increased the point of 3, and the screening question is then a dry eyes less than 3 months, dry eyes greater than 3 months. You can see the possible basic evaluation is unstimulated saliva flow rate, Schimmer's test, ENA immunofluorescence, ENA titer, ROSSA titer. If this labial salivary gland biopsy, focus score, and then the accepted diagnosis may lead to the head MRI, spinal tap, or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. If it's in pregnancy, then acute congenital heart block maybe also lead to this Sjogren's syndromes are the side effect of this. So according to the 2016 American College of Rheumatology and European League Against Rheumatism classification criteria for the primary algorithm of the Sjogren is the ANA, anti-nuclear antibodies, ENMG, electronumerography, ESSDI, ULARS, Sjogren syndrome disease, activity index, HRCT, high resolution computed tomography, PFT, and pulmonary function test. All these diagnostic algorithms are available as of today according to the 2016 American College of Rheumatology and European League Against the Rheumatoid classification. So If we talk about the laboratory testing, ANA is highly relevant for the diagnosing of the connecting tissue disorder, and this ANA titers include the anti-ROSSA and the anti-LASSP antibodies, which may lead to the final conclusion and diagnosis of the patient. If we talk about the clinical and immunological profile of the mixed connective tissue disease in comparison of the four diagnostic criteria, it's described that the clinical and immunological profile of the patient with according to our four different authors. So, diagnostic criteria for the mixed connective tissue disorder is related to the this anti-ENA antibodies, anti-UIRNP positive or anti-SM negative. So Kasukawa, that's in condition in which the anti-RNB antibodies is positive. It's a mixed symptoms of the common symptoms, and the other disease conditions with the serological criteria is anti-RNP antibody titer is 1:1000 is positive. So if in Kahan's disease serological criteria higher titer anti-RNB ABA corresponding, and then its titer is greater than 1:2000. So these are the all clinical criteria, serological criteria, and the diagnosis on the basis of the ANA profile testing gives you the right answers. So if we go to the primary bilateral cholangitis, this is made within 2 or 3 items on the basis of items are there. Consider evaluation of cholestatic enzymes, the detection of AMA histopathology, and this is all about the clinical and molecular hepatology basis. They have guidelines for the imaging studies, including the dilatation of the bile duct. And then AMA testing is required, and then they go for a typical finding, confirm the diagnostics of the PBC, which is a primary bilateral cholangitis. So if we talk about the autoantibodies in clinical application, overall, the antibody testing for the autoimmune disease has a number of tests that can be used for the percentage-wise for the diagnosis of the SLE, and then systematic sclerosis, scleroderma, and the autoantibodies for the PMND. Then auto joint detection is applied to improve both the sensitivity and specificity autoantibody testing for the autoimmune disease, which helps them a lot. What is the solution which are provided by the SNI on from the Maglumi platforms is now the focal point for us. So as a leading immunoassay broad portfolio, we are offering a very comprehensive menu. You can see here that we have a very comprehensive menu for the autoimmune disease markers for in the terms of ANA profile and ENA profile. While the Roche, Siemens, Abbott, and Disorin, they only have one autoimmune disorders testing is the NTCCP, and the Disorin has a anti double stranded DNA, and the ENA and ENA profile belongs to the Disorin only. So we have in the autoimmune disease comprehensive menu. In a real term, we do not have any competitors in the market. So due to this broad menu for the even for the autoimmune disease, which is more common in the Latin Americans and the American countries, including the European countries, maybe there's some in Russia, they have some feedback for the autoimmune disease prevalence. But as far I know, the Russia, the most common disease are the CAD, which are basically the heart disease of the coronary artery disease. And then the second highest mortality rate in Russia belongs to the tuberculosis and encephalopathy, HIV, and other sexually transmitted disease, including the rabies as well. So these are the top most 5 diseases which are very common in Russia. So as far I know, that's this autoimmune disease parameters are very niche parameters, but through these parameters, you can enter in any lab which have an specialized testing, and then through which you can use to target the competitors' business, like the bread and butter for any IVD testing laboratory is number one is the thyroid profile, and then the fertility profile, and then the anemia profile like B12, folate, ferritin, and then they have an infectious profile, and then they have a other tumor markers like CA125, CA15-3, CA19-9, CEA, and sometimes they have a niche parameters of like 17 hydroxyprogesterone, free estradiol, free progesterone, and then the free testosterone level, and these are all the parameters which are available from the SNIPE platform. But in case of autoimmune disease, we have a very comprehensive menu for the autoimmune disease, which the other competitor they do not have this. So just give me a 1 minute. So I have to take one picture. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are at a leading position in immunodiagnostics menu for autoimmune disease diagnosis. So let's talk about the Meglumi autoimmune disease parameters, like double standard DNA, ENA screening test for IgG. The good thing is that all these essays are the quantitative essays. So the quantitative analysis is there, and then the testing is anti-double standard DNA, IgG, and the other anti-stimon, anti-M2EA, 3EA. These are all assays. Either they are IgG or other assays which are belongs to the autoimmune disease. The sample types is very flexible in all autoimmune disease. They have a serum and plasma. The volume is very optimal for the diagnosis of these autoimmune disease, and the measuring range is desirable, and according to the requirement it's up to the mark. So here are the few other things related to the measuring range improvement in the first generation and the second generation parameters. Like these are the next generation. There is an improvement. You can see here the measuring range for 0.797 to 800 and 400 and 400. But in the next generation, they have improved the measuring range according to the CLSI guidelines. And for the LOB and LOD and LOQ, they have introduced the concept of this in this next version of analytes. So we have a next generation, second generation, these autoimmune antibodies testings. So we have a very comprehensive markers for the autoimmune disease. Like if we talk about rheumatoid arthritis, we have anti-CCP, RF, and CRP markers. For the MCTD, we have this ANA and ENA profile. For PM and DM disease, they have anti-JO1, IgG, and along with the ANA and ENA profile. For the PBC, then SCC, SCS, and SLEs. So we have a very comprehensive menu for all types of autoimmune common diseases in the world. So these are the global relative markers, and then the red colors shows you this is the guidelines recommended for the rule out of SLE, systematic lupus erythropoiesis testing, and then the SSC as well. So the red markers is all highly specific for the diagnosis of these uh, autoimmune diseases. So if we compare the anti-CCP, which is the most common markers in use now these days by the laboratory for the diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. So that's a specific marker as compared to the RF test. So what we have two generations analytes, like first generation RF anti-CCP parameters and the second generation. So what is the improvement in it? So we can see it together and we will compare it with the other competitors. So we have a competitions with Roche, Siemens, and Abbott. They have 100 test or 200 pack size. Only Snipes gives you the solution for the 100 test and 50 test pack size with the serum and plasma flexibility for the anti-CCP, while the Roche has only the serum recommended. This that Siemens and Abbott have a privilege to give a serum and plasma both sample type recommendation for the detection of anti-CCP in the blood sample. So we have a quantitative analysis. The Roche has a semi-quantitative analysis, and the Siemens and the Abbott even have a semi-quantitative analysis. So they have a cutoff value like less than 20 is considered as a negative, and greater than 20 considered as a reactive or a positive, but we have a quantitative analysis in our this essays. So if we talk about the calibration, we have a 1 week calibration stability. The Roche also have a same. The Siemens and Abbott, they have a privilege of having a calibration of more. So as far I know, they have not a 30 days, they have a 28 days calibration stabilities. So after 28 days, it is recommended to calibrate or replace the reagent if they are not able to consume that reagent within 28 days. The sample volume that we are offering is minimal in this autoimmune disease rule out. Limit of blank, limit of detection, and limit of quantitation. It's very important because if the result is less than 7, we also report a result up to the 0.5 is a blank value, and limit of detection is 0.8, and limit of quantitation is 1.0. So usually lab use the limit of quantitation as a low linearity. We can detect up to the 1, while the Roche can detect up to less than 7. They can detect 0.2, and they can detect 0.1. So we are equally good. If we talk about the assay range, we have a good linearity with the up to the 500 U per ml. The Siemens and the LNT, they have a low linearity of higher side. So in case of high value and for the prognosis purpose, if they want to use this assay for means quantitatively. Okay, so okay. So the quantitative analysis and the semi-quantitative analysis is a term in which if some cutoff is given, like for the anti-CCP, if the cutoff is less than 20 is considered as a positive, negative, and greater than 20 is considered as a positive. And we are claiming in the anti-CCP, we are claiming that the results is the quantitative, right? And the calibration and the result you said U per ml is not a quantitative analysis. So let me check, and I will give you the feedback after the break that you are right, because in the Roche, if they are claiming they are a semi-quantitative, and Siemens and Abbott also a semi-quantitative, they are using the same unit, U per ml. But why, if we are using the U per ml and we are claiming that we are a quantitative analysis? I understand your question. During the break, I will check, or I can give you the later the answers. Right? Thank you. I have to take your question picture because if I forget. Okay. Okay, Anton, thank you. So if we talk about the calibrators and quality controls, yes, we are providing free of cost calibrators. Only with the Siemens calibrators are available by the Roche and Abbott. They allow you to purchase calibrators and controls separately. So if we go for performance with other manufacturer of anti-HCCV on the basis of 736 samples, 736 samples. The commercially available rheumatoid and anti-CCP marker for to rule out the rheumatoid arthritis. The SNIPE versus the commercial available are 199 samples were positive and 10 samples were negative, and in which they saw 16 were positive on the SNIPE and they were negative on the commercially available, while the SNIPE has 511 parameters, also a negative, which was also negative on the other company. So the positive agreement is 95.22% and the negative agreement is 96.97%. The overall agreement is 96.47. So according to this, the performance of the anti-CCP from the SNIPE platform is equally good as compared to the other commercially available parameters that are available in the market. So if we go to the comparison of SNIPE anti-double stranded DNA IgG, which is in a type of autoimmune disease rule out situation, like we have, and again, the privilege of having a comparison, not with the Roche, Abbott, or Siemens. Only the company which are available is a Diasorin and the Euromine ELISA-based technique, which is in the manual procedures. So we have a 50 test pack size as compared to the Diasorin. They have a minimum lowest pack size of 100 tests. The Euromine is in a manual procedure, so we will not consider it as exactly apple-to-apple comparison, but it's an also competitors in double standard DNA IgG solution. So if we talk about the sample type, the serum and the plasma, so all they have a recommendation. We have a quantitative analysis, and the same with the Diasorin, and then Euromine have also a quantitative and qualitative both. The calibration frequency is a 7-day. The calibration frequency is a 7 days, while the Diasorin has a 14 days. Every time they need to be calibrated on the ELISA because ELISA has some limitation of each batch calibration is required. Sample volume is minimal as compared to the other, which is not a big significant change, but it's we are lower in that. We have a very comprehensive LOB, LOD, and LOQ. On the basis of that, we have a broad measuring range of from 1 to 800 IU per ml as compared to 0 to 240 IU per ml. So the test time for our assay is 28 to 36 minutes in different models, while for the Diasorin, it's not reported. I'm not sure what is the time for the Diasorin, but it's most probably it is more than a 60 minutes assay time as far I know. So compare with the other manufacturer, ANA, the pack size is this, and the competitor of SNIPE, ANA is Diasorin and Euromine. They have a 100 test pack size and 96 pack size. We have a flexibility of 50 tests, serum and plasma. Both sample types are recommended. Quantitative analysis as compared to the Diasorin qualitative and the Euromine qualitative. If we talk about the calibration frequency, 7 days, 14 days, which is not a big deal as compared to the sample volume of just 20 microliter. and they have a targeted double-stranded DNA. Different parameters are available on this platform. So in this platform's ANA, they have our assay has a double-stranded DNA, histone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 analytes can be detected in our ANA profile as compared to the 8, 9 analytes from the disorin platforms. So we are more analytes in the ANA profile as compared to the disorin and uromine. So if we convert match with the ENA profile, the ENA screening test, you can see that we have an 100 test and 50 test, and only the uromine ELISA technique, which is a manual procedure, is available for the comparison for the ENA profile. And then we have an edge of number of low tests with the automation specialty of the test time is 28 to 36 minutes, but they have more than 1 hour is required to perform ENA profile from this platform. So we have a serum and plasma, both sample type recommended as compared to the limitation of Euroimmune ELISA technique only with the serum. We have a quantitative analysis versus the qualitative. We have a calibration frequency of every 7 days, but they have every test or every batch, they need to run a calibration. System volume is low as compared to the ELISA technique, and we have detecting MNR, NP slash SM, SM, SSA, SSB, SCL70, and the JO1. So while the NRSP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So we have same numbers of target material detected in the ENA profile. So we are equally good as compared to the uromine, but the comfort of automation gives us an edge as compared to the ELISA-based technique process. The positive and the agreement on the basis of run on the basis of run, when they have run the 29 samples were negative on both SNIPE and the commercially available anti-centromeres, and then 25 positive samples were also positive on the SNIPE. So the negative rate of agreement and the positive POV, positive value and the negative value is in 100%, and overall agreement is 100% when the centromere then. And they have also a comparison with the other manufacturers for the anti-NR, NP slash SM, and the negative detection rate, or the negative rate is 95%, and the positive rate is also a 95. The overall agreement is 95%, which is equally good for us compared to the other parameters. And we have also a comparison with the anti-RIPS-P commercially available. They have also anti-SSA, SSB comparison, positive and negative agreement with the other commercially available brand. In anti-SSA, we have 100% agreement. In anti-SSB, we have a 95.12% agreement. So if we talk about the marketing region for the autoimmune disease diagnostic market, the test types may be then autoantibodies testings, and along with the CBC and some metabolic panels may help to rule out this autoimmune disease, including the CRP and then erythrocyte sedimentation rate, urine analysis, and the others. If we talk about the disease like systematic lupus erythematosus, rheumatoid arthritis, sclerosis, MCTD, polymyositis, dermatomyositis, Zika syndromes, Graves, Hashimoto, type 1, and other disease, the region is more common is the North America and the Europe and the Asia Pacific. You can see that the different autoimmune disease has a different testing profile, and the different test has a different regions prevalence and according to the epidemiological distributions. And then in the whole world, they have a different region who has a more potential for the treatment for the diagnosis and the prevalence of that autoimmune disease. So this is about the more about the region, diagnosis type, test type. So the overall market data shows that the autoimmune disease market will be around 8.46 billion US dollar by 2029. So the other important thing is about the CAGR as per the forecast period for the 2022 and 29. The CAGR is 8.15, and you can see that from 2022 to 2029, it may be increased up to 8.46 billion US dollar. As compared to the high and the medium and the lower prevalence, is more growth is observed in the Asia Pacific regions and the Australia region as compared to the North Americans and Latin Americans countries, including the European countries as well. So the global autoimmune diagnostic market is expected to be 8.46 million by 2029. So if you talk about autoimmune disease diagnostic market by disease different type, like the systematic autoimmune disease diagnosis or a localized disease diagnosis, there is a ratio of having a different data, and then a global systematic autoimmune disease diagnosis market type as in a pie chart of this. That's in a pie chart shows you the more about the rheumatoid arthritis is the most common part of the autoimmune disease market share in the autoimmune disease. And the second part is systematic lupus erythematosus, that's an SLE. And then the other part is the other diseases which have miscellaneous MCDs, SPD, and then other diseases. And then the smallest part for the autoimmune disease is ankylosing spondylitis diagnostics, which helps them the more. So the more focus is the rheumatoid arthritis and the SLEs are the most common types of autoimmune disease prevalence in global distribution of this autoimmune disease. So if we go to the more about the US SLE market, it's been growing from 2012 to 2015. You can see here the corticosteroids, antimalarial hormone, immunosuppressive drugs, and biologics, they are increasing. And then if we talk about the rheumatoid arthritis, this is also increasing from 9.5 to 18.6. And then if you talk about the US scleroderma therapeutic market size is also increasing in the 2014 to 2026 within a different classification, and the global primarily bilateral cholangitis therapeutics market is also a historical market forecast of 10.5% growth rate. So this is overall the rheumatoid arthritis market growth rate is high, and then the CAGR basis there's the potential as a market more in the future for these markers. So the next question, if the customer or you can ask why choose Meglumi autoimmune parameters. The number one, we have a guideline acceptables. We have a very comprehensive profile, including in an individual profile, we have a more probability of having an accurate diagnosis. We have a more broad menu. We have a rich selection. We have a variety of diagnostic indicators across the board. We have a single reagent, either if you want to use on an M series and X series, we have the same reagents can be used for that. We have a clinical sensitivity and specificity on the basis of positive and negative agreement and overall agreement with the gold standard of that analytes and various diseases in which a self-immune, that's an autoimmune disease markers. We have a broadest group, and we have a flexible project portfolio with a greater detectable range, broad measuring range, short turnaround time, less labor cost, and the reliability and accuracy from the automatic platforms. Also with that, we have a calibration and the 2 level of QC with the including in the reagents for the even for the regulated countries. If they want to register our product, they have a one window solution. They only register the product with the bundle deal of calibrators and controls. No separate product registration is required, because if the product list number is changed, again in some countries there is a requirement for the re-registration of change a reference number or the list number of the product, but we have a very different criteria and approach that we are given a free calibration control, which helps the regulated country to use with the freedom and the reliability from the SNI. We have a vast market, and this is all about the autoimmune disease. If you have any question, you can ask, or otherwise, we have to, after the 5 minutes break, we will start next presentation. So any question?